I'm gonna like this light.
Sometimes I wonder if I just don't know the word for what I'm looking for. I search and I search and I search, and then out of the blue, I stumble across it. As a theater designer, gobos are as common as ducks in a pond, as are the lights that they go on. But ellipsoidals and licos are big, expensive, and heavy, most of the things that you're trying to avoid in a light, and rarely are they LED. Then along comes the optical snoot. Why hadn't I heard of these things before? I've been searching for a gobo-compatible light for 2 years now, and at one point I even considered buying a micro projector. Now I'm sure that these have been around for forever, but until 2 weeks ago, they were new to me. So what is an optical snoot? Well, basically it focuses the light from an instrument that you already have in such a way that you can use a gobo or etched metal sheet to cast a reverse shadow. I say reverse shadow because it's an important distinction that I'll come back to. Now you can't do this with an unfocused or a regular light because the light will wrap around the gobo and the pattern will be overwhelmed. It's really a bit of magic how these things work. Now this is the focalized optical snoot made by I don't know, China. There's no brand on the unit, but the listing said Photoconic, and I'll link to the eBay store below, as well as an Amazon option by Wellmaking, which is kind of weird because I just reviewed one of their lights. Now, there are two basic types of focalized snoots, one that has a lens already inside it, and then there's this type, which allows you to attach the lens of your choice to the front. Now, these lenses work in a very similar way to being on a camera. A wide-angle lens will produce a large pattern, and a telephoto lens will produce a smaller, more intense pattern. With a telephoto, you can be farther away from your wall or surface, and it will have the same amount of light hit it, because the light is being focused through the lens. And the focus ring on your lens can blur the pattern or make it razor sharp. This snoot came without any lens and cost about $135. Now, all of the designs for an optical snoot are pretty much the same, and they're pretty much always made of metal, so there's really not much difference between a pricey snoot and an inexpensive one, other than whether you can attach a lens. The built-in lens snoot is actually cheaper, and that's because they're less flexible. You only get a mid-range lens inside. You can't attach a wide or a telephoto. If you're buying this type, where you can attach your own lens, they typically have a Canon mount, but it's easy enough to get an adapter that goes with the lens of your choice. They're as cheap as $12, but I'd avoid those. I bought a $12 beauty and had to use a pair of pliers to get it off my lens. This $20 one works better, and I like its slim design, but I think a larger adapter with a dedicated switch would be probably the best choice. Now, as I said, the snoot design is pretty good, though a little baffling at times. Because some lights get hot, they've created a lot of holes for the air to vent through, and this vent ring here allows light flares to come out of it, which can then flare into your camera. Also, the gobo slot is, well, wildly over-engineered. It's got a spring-lock washer system that's entirely unnecessary. Traditional Licos, for example, have just a slot and the gobo rests inside. It's simpler, less futzy, and a lot cheaper to make. Speaking of gobos, the light comes with a gobo holder, 4 basic gobos that can create a window, blinds, slot, or spot, and it also has a set of fairly useless color slides and a couple of convenient yet overly tiny gels. The color slides are, well, just, I don't know, there's like camels in Egypt and railroad tracks and a skeleton smoking a cigarette. I just don't know what they thought we'd be using them for. All of the gobo elements, though, can be combined, so you can create a red tinted window, for example. But more importantly, you can use a traditional size M gobo, and there are hundreds of designs. Most of them cost about $15, but they can be as expensive as several hundred. You can also make your own designs using just a pie tin or any relatively heat-resistant material. I saw one made of cardboard, though I wouldn't trust that for very long. If your light gets hot, then the snoot will get even hotter. That's something to consider when it comes to mounting, say, a plastic body lens on the snoot. But if your light stays cool, then the snoot just gets warm. The heat does get trapped inside to a certain degree, but with my instruments, the snoot never got too hot to handle. So what would you use this for? Well, narrative or fictional movies are the obvious choice, but even when we film an interview, we're often presented with a plain white wall. Projecting the pattern of a window or a light streak can add depth to an otherwise flat background. It can also create a hard light that can be used to add punch to your subject. And gobos can tell a story of what's just outside the frame, creating a world that may not necessarily exist. Not just a window, but a cathedral window, or a cross, or a light through a cracked doorway, or the shadow of a picket fence, or a custom logo for your client. When it comes to optical snoots, it's important to remember two things. Because the snoot in the lens reduces the aperture for the light, it reduces the amount of light. How much depends to some degree on the speed of your lens, so it helps to have a fast lens. An f2.8 lens will cut a whopping 4 stops of light from your instrument. The snoot reduces the first 3 stops and the lens the last one. This doesn't appear to be a drawback of the Photoconic brand, but rather just all optical snoots. So you can see the importance of using a fast lens. Now, on the bright side, the lens doesn't need to have any other quality other than being fast. You don't have to worry about vignetting or distortion, chromatic aberrations, haze, dust, cracks, focusing speed. Any used cheap fast manual lens will do. And I already bring 2 to 3 extra lenses on a shoot anyway. A zoom lens, while more expensive, gives you an immediate flexibility for sizing your pattern and working at different distances. Now, I was hoping that this snoot would work well with my Zuma 60-watt light, but it's possible but not powerful enough to be practical. The light has to be within 5 feet of the surface, so 100 watts is really a better choice when combined with an f2.8 lens. The other thing to remember is that the snoot doesn't project darkness. Now, while this may seem like a silly thing to say, it can actually trip you up in practical use. The clarity of your pattern is determined by the amount of ambient light in your shot. In many situations, your background may be only 3 stops lower than your subject, so unless you want to blow out your whites, the gobo pattern only varies by roughly 4 stops, regardless of how powerful a light you use. If your subject is perfectly lit at f5.6 and your back wall is 3 stops below for contrast, then you don't want your pattern to be so bright that it distracts from your subject. You can get away with maybe a stop brighter than your subject before it starts to feel like they're in 2 different worlds. And a 4-stop difference in your pattern makes for a fairly subtle gobo. So the snoot works best in a dark environment or scene. And you have to keep in mind that you're not creating shadows. It's not the shadow of a window or doorway. It's the light that is shaped by the window or door. It's a reverse shadow, and that's a subtle but important distinction. Off camera, you've created an imaginary light source, a street lamp, the moonlight, a sunbeam, and that is blocked by an object just outside the frame. And that light source has to be brighter than your wall or it won't make a visible pattern. The morning sun coming through a window creates a light pattern, not a shadow pattern, because the shadow is the same brightness as the rest of your wall. If it's a street lamp, then the street lamp is brighter than the interior of the room and the shadow of the tree is the same luminance as the rest of the bedroom wall. Now at $135, this optical snoot isn't cheap, but it's relatively compact, indestructible, and versatile. It provides another tool for designing creative light on set, because as cinematographers we are, after everything is said and done, painters of light. The camera is just a blank canvas, and what we do with light and color make the image. So I'm looking forward to working with this new tool. Now if this has been helpful, please hit the subscribe button because that helps me, and you'll know when I post the next best thing.